Yo, what is going on, guys? This is Beanie, and guys, I am so excited because today I am starting back Beanie's Player Reviews. You know, the series that I go and I review all of the diamonds. I give them a FAG rating, which stands for Final Assessment Grade. No other double meaning there. But, yeah, just final assessment grade, that's it. And there are a few changes to this year, though. I'm going to be doing it just a little bit differently. Last year, well, it's not that much differently. Last year, I had a template that I used to come up with the player ratings, and it was based off a player's hitting, their defense, and their speed. Well, I'm doing kind of the same thing this year, except I broke it down into 5 different categories, and this is for position players. With pitchers, the only thing that I added was a little bit of control, because I do think control has walk per nine has a slightly bigger effect this year. That's the only thing I changed about the pitcher reviews, is that I added that little nugget in there. But basically, with position players, I grade their hit tool, their power tool, their glove, their arm strength, and their speed. So now, instead of 3 categories, it's broken down into 5 categories, and it's weighed dependent on what position the player plays. So if he plays first base, he is going to be getting most of his score from his hit tool and his power, and then a little bit to like his fielding. Not a lot at all, but a little bit to his fielding. And then stuff like arm strength and speed, I don't even really count it for first baseman. It doesn't mean that much to me. That's another well, I'm not going to get into that. But and then for like a shortstop, everything is kind of spread out pretty evenly between his hit, his power, his glove, his speed, and his arm strength. There are a couple things that are a little bit more important than others, but basically that's how I do it. I have those 5 things, and then I distribute it, you know, based on whatever position he plays and what I feel is important to that position. And then I add all that up, I divide it by 10, and I come up with the final assessment grade. So, yeah, with that being said, well, should I explain how I do it for pitchers? Basically, for pitchers, all I do is I grade their hit and K per 9 together. I grade their walk per 9, because that's what it really matters for control, is their walk per 9. The control attribute doesn't mean that much at all. It's been tested. You know, you can disagree with me in the comments if you want to, but it has been tested before. It doesn't do a whole lot. So walk per 9 is graded a little bit. For starters, it's graded a little bit higher than it is for relievers. You know, and vice versa for other attributes. And then I also grade their stuff, which is their velocity and break combined. And then I also grade their pitch selection. So, and it's weighted a little bit differently based off whether or not they're a starter or a reliever. But with that being said, guys, today we are going to be grading these career arc players. I'm really excited. This is where I was going to start, is the career arcs, and then I might the next episode I might grade these I'm only going to be doing diamonds and maybe a few golds, but I'm going to be grading these diamond like collections right here, the ones that you get from the hat collection and all that, along with some other just kind of various diamonds like maybe the Dykstra and some of the ones that you get from Battle Royale. So that is the game plan, but first we are going to start out with the career arc diamonds. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, after that extremely long-winded introduction, we are going to start out with Billy Williams. Billy Williams is a left fielder, so he favors, you know, hitting tools more than the fielding and the speed and everything. And on that front, he does very, very well. His contact is through the roof versus righties. It's very solid versus lefties. And he also hits righties very, very hard. Now, against lefties, I did have to dock him a little bit because he just, you know, 64 power, that's enough to get the job done, but it's not enough to really stand out. He also has good vision, so you're never going to have any PCI issues, but I mean, who are we kidding? These days, nobody is having any PCI issues. And, you know, on the fielding front, he is decent. He has 65 fielding with 64 reaction. That's not great by any means. I didn't give him great grades when it came to fielding, but I gave him, you know, somewhat decent grades. And his arm is perfectly reasonable for left field. I wouldn't go throwing him in right field because, one, his fielding just really isn't good enough for right field, and two, he just doesn't have the arm strength for it. And first base would be reasonable for him, though. I think his fielding is perfectly fine for left field or first base. And, you know, from a speed standpoint, he's not going to hurt you. He's not going to help you. He's just kind of there. So, a pretty good card, and I ended up giving him an overall FAG of 7.5. And it's important to note with this FAG rating, I tried to get it to where whenever the grades came out that 5.0 was average, that 5.0 would be like an average type player. But after I started really getting into it, I ended up having to set a baseline average player of 6.0. So if a player is above 6.0, I think that he will be an above average Diamond Dynasty player at this point in the year. If he is below 6.0, then that means he's going to be below average. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there so you know. And another thing to note is that a lot of these career arc players, they might kind of group together around the same type of rating just because SDS did a pretty good job of keeping their value pretty similar. There are a few exceptions to this, however, and we will get into those in just a minute. But anyways, let's move on to Chase Utley. Okay, this Chase Utley might be the best of all of the position player career arcs. I like this card a lot. He's got fantastic contact, which is very important for second baseman, or at least it used to be. I don't know. Contact is kind of weird this year, but he's not just a contact guy. He's got reasonable power versus righties, and you know, pretty decent. I mean, slightly. I don't know, it's fucking average, okay? His power versus lefties is average, but against righties, it's definitely above average. It's workable. He's got good vision to go along with it. I gave him good grades for a second baseman hitting. They're not going to be a ton of second basemen that are going to out-hit this Chase Utley this year. He's pretty good. Also, another thing, he does kind of have a weird swing. Last year, the swing was workable. I haven't used him this year that much, so I couldn't really say. I don't have a lot of info on a swing yet or anybody else's swing, so I'm not going to be factoring that into the grade until I have more info. But defensively, this Chase Utley is fantastic. Well, I don't know. Why am I using all these hyperbolic statements? It's very good. It's not fantastic. It's not elite, but it's very good. 85, 82 reaction. He's got a good arm. I don't factor arm strength that much into second base. It's not that important for that position, but he's got it. So if you ever need it, you have it. You know, better to have it, not need it, that whole thing. And from a speed standpoint, this is probably the only thing that cost Chase Utley a good amount of points, is the fact that at second base, oftentimes you want to find a guy that's faster, and he just simply doesn't have that much speed. He's not going to hurt you on the base pass, but he's not going to help you either. He's not going to steal a ton of bases or anything like that. So I did have to dock him a few points because of that. And at the end of the day, that ended up giving him an overall FAG of 7.6. Okay, I might have to run through these a little quicker now. Okay, Gary Carter, 92 overall Gary Carter. Very good versus lefties. Borderline elite for the non-immortal players versus lefties. Against righties, he's very serviceable, 76, 65. You can get the job done with that, especially with the 93 vision. He's going to be a solid hitter for you overall, but if you're one of those guys that looks for catcher defense, this might be your guy. He's got great blocking, he's got great fielding, decent reaction, and he's got a big-time arm to go along with it. He is not going to hurt you in any way behind the plate. He is solid all around. And speed doesn't really get factored into the catcher position much, but it is worth saying that for a catcher, he has average to above average speed. Most catchers are pretty slow, and I would say that Carter really isn't super fast, but he's not super slow. Overall, I ended up giving him a FAG of 7.4. So as you can see right now, they're all starting to group together, but they do kind of start to separate here in just a minute. All right, next up we have the 91 overall Paul Molitor, and this is a kind of a weird card, guys. Last year I loved Paul Molitor because he could play second base or third base. He had speed, he had power, he wouldn't kill you out in the field. And this year, this Paul Molitor is basically the exact opposite of that. He has terrible defense, he doesn't have that much speed at all, and he's a first baseman that can only play first base. And he has no power. And it's just, there's not a lot to love about this card other than his fantastic contact. His contact is the only thing that saves him from being just an awful, awful card. And I still don't think that this card is great. I mean, even with the 99 contact and the 120 power, basically, you're not going to be, or 120 power, 120 contact versus lefties, I'm sorry. But his power versus righties, you're not going to be hitting that many home runs with him versus righties. And versus lefties, I mean, what is that average power for a first baseman versus lefties? Maybe slightly below. It's just not that great of a card. At first base, you want a big left-handed power bat or maybe just a dominant right-handed hitter. You want that offense. That is where a lot of your offense is going to come from. And this guy just isn't going to provide you with that much. He just doesn't have enough power to do that. So because of that, I ended up giving him an overall FAG of 5.6. So he is a below average card in my opinion. Moving on to the 90 overall Larry Doby. This card comes with a bit of a caveat, and that is that he is listed as a center fielder, so I ended up grading him as a center fielder. And a lot of people may be wondering, well, this card looks awfully similar to that Billy Williams. In fact, he even has better defense, but and you'll see what I end up grading this Larry Doby in just a minute, but his grade is lower than the Billy Williams, and some may ask why. And the reason is because he plays center field and it uses a different system than left field that Billy Williams plays. So what you can infer from that is Larry Doby as a center fielder will be the grade that I give him in just a minute. But if you move him to right field or left field, his grade improves dramatically, probably a full point and a half, something like that. So yeah, he's great versus righties, 103.89. Versus lefties, he's, a good contact hitter, 89.45. Not going to be hitting home runs or anything like that. He's got good discipline, so you can get all the check swings that you want with him. Good vision, all that stuff. And he's also pretty decent out in the field. For a center fielder, you might want a little bit more defense than this and maybe even a little more speed, but he's not going to kill you out there, especially if you stick him in left field or right field. But as grading him as a center fielder, he's not going to grade out great out in the field, and he doesn't have a great arm, but he's serviceable. He's not going to kill you. And also, center field is a position that values speed, and he doesn't have a ton of speed. So with all of that being said, I ended up grading Larry Doby a 6.6. So he's still above average out in center field, but like I said, it's with that caveat that if he was a left fielder, he would probably be something like a 7.6 or a 7.7, something like that. So just keep that in mind. Next up is the 88 overall Hanley Ramirez, and this is kind of another card whose grade I feel like it should be higher, but once I plugged it in, this is what it came out, so I kind of have to roll with it. 88 overall Hanley Ramirez, 110 contact versus right, 92 contact versus left. He's going to be a great contact hitter with speed. He's got that 85 speed over there. Just he's going to be a threat on the base paths. And versus righties, he's got some big time power for a shortstop. Most shortstops aren't going to give you 74 power versus righties with 110 contact. There just aren't that many of them out there. The problem is versus lefties, he is just a pure contact hitter. He's not going to be getting any exit velo basically at all versus lefties. So that's a problem that you're going to have to deal with. I'm usually not a big fan of righties who have reverse platoon splits, but I think that this card does so many things well that it can end up working for you, as long as you just keep in mind when you're facing a lefty that you're not going to be getting a lot of power out of him. I think he can still be very, very valuable in your lineup. And defensively, Hanley has kind of always had a reputation of being a bad defender, but this card actually isn't that bad out in the field. He has 77 reaction to go with that 85 speed, so he's going to be getting to a good amount of balls. He might not be all that reliable on like the routine plays, or he might, just miss some balls occasionally or something like that, but he's not going to be awful. His glove isn't going to be awful. And he's got some decent arm strength, about average type of arm strength to go with that fielding. And, with the speed and everything, I just think that this card has a lot of unseen value, like kind of under the skin value. And I ended up giving him an overall grade of a 7.3. Okay, now on to the 89 overall Joe Torre, and I gotta be honest, this was a card that I was really excited about before I found out how this game would play. As soon as I figured out that this game was gonna rely so much on power and it was really gonna nerf down what contact really meant, I got a lot less excited about this card. He's listed as a third baseman, so that's what I'm going to grade him as. If he were a catcher, I would probably grade him a good deal higher, but he's not. He's listed as a third baseman, so keep that in mind. He's got great contact, man. 112, 122, doesn't get a whole lot better than that. Versus righties, he's got 66 power. It doesn't feel that way with him in your hand, like when you're playing with him. It feels like it's maybe mid-50s, and he's got 45 power versus lefties. He's not going to be a big power threat. He's also not going to be great out in the field, and he's also not going to be all that fast. So, what do we have here? We have a third baseman that's not great defensively. He doesn't have a lot of speed. All he does well is he hits for contact. And the way that I grade third baseman is pretty heavy on the power aspect. That's one of the positions that you want to get a big power bat in. So I'm not insanely stoked with this Joe Torre card, and I did grade him below average. I ended up giving him a FAG of 5.2, and I got to kind of stick by that. I don't think that this card in the end is going to end up being all that great. But the good news is that this 89 Joe Torre leads to the 99 overall Chipper Jones, who I think is going to be one of the best cards in the game. So, you still might want to do this program. Okay, moving on to the pitchers. The 90 overall Don Sutton. Like I said, this is a much different grading scale than the hitters. We grade hit and K per nine together, walk per nine together separately, his velocity and break separately, and then his pitch selection separately. But okay, here we go. For his hit and K per nine, very solid, very, very good. Best out of all the starters, starting pitchers in the career arc section by far, really. Very, very solid hit and K per nine. He's got decent walk per nine to go along with that, so he's not, control isn't going to be a big problem for this card, but it's not as good as the other ones on this list. His velo is the big problem with this card, and a lack of a changeup is another big problem with this card. He just doesn't have that much velo. He throws 91 on his four seam, high 80s on his sinker. That's just, man, that's not going to fool a lot of people, especially when you don't have a changeup to keep them honest. That knuckle curve and that screwball are not that difficult to read out of a pitcher's hand. You need to have a pitch to disguise that sinker and that fastball, and he just doesn't have one. So I don't think this Don Sutton is really going to play all that well. I don't think he's going to be all that good. For that reason, I ended up giving him a FAG of a 5.4. Jag Morris has similar problems to that, what was that other card? The Don Sutton. Similar problems to that Don Sutton, but a little bit different, I guess. His per nines aren't as good as that Sutton, but they're still respectable. They're not terrible. He's got better walk per nine, so he's going to be able to control the ball a little bit better. His stuff, though, is where the problem lies. Again, he just doesn't throw all that hard. And his pitch selection really isn't all that great either. He does have a changeup, but he also has a fork ball, which seems sort of redundant, but he does throw the fork ball a little bit harder. So I don't know, maybe you could get into like some reverse changeup type deals where you're throwing off the hitter's timing, maybe. Throws 93 on his fastball, which is, you know, it's better than the Sutton, but it's still not very hard at all. He does have a really solid slider, though, so I've got to give him credit for that. For that reason, I graded him a little bit better than the Sutton, but still not all that great. I ended up giving him a FAG of a 5.6. Next up is the 90 overall Bret Saberhagen, and I like this card a lot more. This card is... it throws harder. Basically, he throws harder, and he has one fantastic quality about him that we'll talk about in just a second. His per nines are right on par with that Morris's. Per nines a little bit better. He also has better walk per nine, so he'll be able to control the ball better. And his stuff is much, much better. He throws 95 on his four seam, which is perfectly fine. You can get away with throwing 95, especially when you have a changeup as filthy as this Bret Saberhagen does. He has a 17 mile per hour average delta between his four seam fastball and his changeup. That is wicked. That is going to throw a lot of people off. And it's going to be a nasty overall card. And he also has a good curveball, good slider to go with it. He's not going to be amazingly dominant or anything like that, but I think that this could be a very solid, very reliable starting pitcher in your rotation. And for that reason, I ended up giving him a FAG of a 7.3. All right, moving on to relief pitchers, we have the 85 overall Lee Smith card, and this card is kind of funky. He's got that fork ball, he's got the cutter. That fork ball is going to probably play a lot like a changeup would play or something like that. But he throws hard. He's got 97 on his four seam. He's got a 91 mile an hour cutter, good slider to go along with it. He's just really solid across the board. He's got good K per nine, decent hit per nine. For a reliever, these would be great for a starter, but for a reliever, you know, these are above average per nines, not fantastic. But he's also got really good walk per nine, which is something that you don't see with a relief pitcher. So it's nice to see a guy that can control pitches pretty well. He's got good stuff. His pitch selection is kind of funky, but I like it. Like, I think it's workable. So overall, I think this Lee Smith is a pretty solid card, and I ended up giving him a FAG of a 7.1. And now the final career art card that we are going to talk about today, the 89 overall Trevor Hoffman. I love this card, and I know that that's going to surprise a lot of people because he doesn't throw all that hard. He only throws 92 miles an hour. But this card is filthy, y'all. He's got amazing per nines, 107, 115. That's fantastic. Now, his walk per nine is a little bit on the low side, but for relief pitchers, that's not as big of a deal as it is for starters. So that's fine. I accept that. Not that big of a deal. Now, man, that 92, how am I going to get past that? Well, I'll tell you how you get past it. You get past it with a 74 mile an hour circle changeup. That is an 18 mile per hour average delta between his four seam and his changeup. That is going to be nasty. It's going to break a ton, that changeup. He also has a good cutter, a good slider, good curveball to go along with it. Got a beautiful 5-pitch mix. This guy might have the best secondary pitches of any pitcher, any relief pitcher at least, in this game. It's just you've got to get past the fact that he only throws 92. You might not be able to throw that four seam all that often. Maybe you have to throw that cutter some. Maybe you have to kind of pitch backwards with this card. All I know is that once I get this card, he will be a part of my bullpen until he proves to me that he's not effective enough to do that. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that this guy is going to prove to me that he can be an effective piece in my bullpen. And for that reason, I ended up giving him a FAG of a 7.9. I do think that that's a little bit high for him, but you know, I mean, that's what the grade came out to be. Maybe I didn't dock him enough for the stuff. I ended up grading his stuff really good because of that delta between his four seam and his circle change. I don't know, but that's what the grade came out to be, and I'm kind of sticking by it. So yeah, Trevor Hoffman with a 7.9. Guys, that is going to do it for this video for my first player review of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like. Let me know that you want more of these. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I love you guys. I will see y'all later, but until then, peace.